I am member number 1212, and I'm so glad to be your host for the evening. We got another great program coming at you tonight. I'm joined by the one and only James Graham to talk about his adventures in Antarctica. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Thank you. Hello, James.
Hello, Andrew.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a really big honor.
So first thing that jumps out to me is that nice shiny ribbon on your chest. So can you tell us a little bit about that and where you got it?
Everyone who works in Antarctica for 6 months is awarded a Medal of Service from the Department of Defense. Okay. And this is not why I did it, but it was a kind of a neat perk that arrived in the mail one day. And if you had asked me when I was 17 if I would get a medal from the Department of Defense, I would have said that's unlikely. But it's really representative of those kind of weird traditions that are upheld and still going on. And like Antarctica, like other places, are a collection of like weird history and weird traditions like that.
Absolutely.
And don't change quickly.
For sure. So I want to get to Antarctica, but I want to start talking about you and your early life. So, you know, you've been a chef basically your entire working career, right? Most of it?
Yes, yeah. My whole adult life, yes. I grew up in New York City, and, you know, working in restaurants is just what you did in high school. You know, it's a real tourist economy. I went to high school in Times Square, so I'm probably the least outdoorsy person that ever went to Antarctica. Our only PE was ballet. That was it. And we worked in restaurants and nightclubs and stuff, and I didn't have the opportunity to go to college, so I decided to learn a trade instead. So, you know, I took up cooking because I thought chefs were really cool and just kind of badass and could make the flames leap out of the pans and stuff.
Sure.
And I got good at it, and I got an apprenticeship to this grand old French restaurant.
Okay.
Real old school, old world thing with the big hat and the big mustaches and the whole bit.
White tablecloths.
White tablecloths, yeah.
Take from the right. Okay.
Yeah, it was really, really grand and prestigious and stuff. It was a great education.
Sure.
Great education. Most of the people that taught me were from Europe, and they'd all been through, you know, World War II and stuff. Wow. So it was a real intense experience. And after that, I was recruited by my friend, the very young fledgling chef, Anthony Bourdain.
Wow, okay.
To be his sous chef, because when he got his first chef's gig, his first restaurant gig. Okay. And right as I finished my apprenticeship, I went to work for him, and I was very excited because we were going to throw out the old European thing and be punk rockers, and and it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, and we worked together for about 7 years and worked our way to the top of the New York restaurant game. But there was always this frustration that you were kind of stuck in New York, and there weren't many travel opportunities.
Sure.
We went to Paris, you know, as part of my apprenticeship, and a little, but it was that's sort of an extension of New York in a way.
Yeah.
You know, it was another big city.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out, and I remember both Tony Bourdain and I talking about applying for jobs on a cruise ship. And we went down, and they were like, no, we only hire people who can speak Portuguese and we like shorter people than you because the kitchen ceiling is really low. And, you know, you're tall, and you don't speak Portuguese.
How tall are you?
I'm 6 feet. He was 6'2", 6'3". So we decided not to do that, and other than 1 or 2 gigs you would get in like a wedding in Connecticut, cooking just never got us out. And we both loved travel, and we were with people who were really whirling. We were always working with other people who were traveling. But that frustration was always there. And I had always dreamed of Antarctica. I was obsessed with the Antarctic and the golden age of adventure.
Really? Okay.
I had read an somebody gave me an encyclopedia when I was about 12. And
they must have really liked you.
It was it was only the first couple of volumes, and it was 80 years old.
Okay. And
they were kind of throwing it out. But it's my neighbor, and they kind of felt sad for me, so they gave me so I read the A book. And I got to the Antarctica Story, and it was the book was published in that volume had been published in 1908, and it says, Captain Scott is going to, he's landed on Antarctica and he's built this hut, and they had a picture of the hut.
Wow.
And it was like this old Daguerre type or whatever photo.
Right,
and it told the whole story of building the hut. And then at the end it says, Captain Scott is going to race to the South Pole and be the first man to plant the flag in the South Pole. And that was the end. And I was like, wow, what happened? So I went to the library and I was like, what happened? And they were like, you're not going to believe this. So I got the book, and they were like, strange kid. And I started reading the story of what happened to Scott and Amundsen in their race to the pole, and I was just blown away. I read that Scott froze to death and froze and starved.
Right.
He did the combo. But I was still so impressed. I was like, that guy went for it. He did it. And I'd always had that in my mind. And I read all the other adventure books, the Shackelton book and Perry of the North, White Dawn.
Okay.
Anything I could get my hands on about that adventure. So then it was about, it was in my 20s, and I was getting kind of burnt out on cooking. I was like, how does somebody do that? Somebody's got to be feeding the people there. How do you do this? And I started researching, and it took me a long time. It's hard to find because New Yorkers don't adventure. They just, But I finally found out about McMurdo Station.
Sure.
Learned all about it, and I applied for a job there. And I was offered a job. Really, they were just so impressed that I found their number and called them. And it was offered a job as just a general construction assistant.
Okay.
But then some family stuff happened, and I couldn't go that year. And I was like, but I wasn't. Yeah, it was a bummer. But I was like, oh, I'll just go next year.
Sure.
But life happens.
Life happens.
And I met my lovely wife, Julia, and fell in love. And that happened. And that was way better than Antarctica. And then we started a business together, and the business was a big success. And then 5 years goes by, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But all the while, I had this in my head. I was like, man, and every time I saw a documentary about Antarctica, or I saw a book of photos, or, whatever, I was always kind of like, that should be my thing. And, and then Bourdain got to go and make his TV show about Antarctica, and I didn't watch it because I was just so And anyway, so it was always there, this little candle burning. And then after the pandemic, my mom had passed away, and the restaurant I was running got shut down by the pandemic, and I was like, wow, all of a sudden I had some free time. And I said, I'm going to do what I want to do. So 2 clicks on the internet, and I had an application going. And I thought that they saw my resume and said, oh, man, we got to get this guy. Let's up our game. But I don't think that was the case. I think they were just like, hey, somebody actually applied. Woohoo! Anyway, I had a long application, and then a phone interview, and then a Zoom interview.
Okay.
A charming person, and the main question they kept asking was not cooking or anything.
Sure.
They asked, are you good with getting along with other people?
Yep.
Are you good dealing with conflict?
Yep.
Are you good with a problem solver?
Yeah.
And they kept asking. I'm like, yeah, I'm a middle child from an Irish Catholic family. So I'm like, yeah, I'm really good at that. And I think that was my main qualification. But I'd like to think my resume meant a lot to them. I'd run several successful restaurants.
Sure.
And in New York, Tucson, and Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
And I'd been, when the pandemic started, I went to work for World Central Kitchen. So we're doing disaster relief and feeding, 1,400 people a day. And I think that's what appealed to them. But they hired me, and I went through this 4-month-long process of getting physically qualified. The dental x-rays, vaccinations, just the psychological tests, just everything. It's exhaustive. Background checks,
Right.
exhausting, a staggering amount of government bureaucracy.
I imagine.
And this was during the COVID year, too, so everything had this extra level of weirdness.
Sure.
But it eventually happened, and there was a lot of Zoom trainings and things, and they set up a group for us to chat with each other so we could ask questions. And like I asked, well, how much thermal underwear do I need to bring? And somebody answered, one of the older people responded saying, don't worry about your underwear. Just worry about your Halloween costume.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, and I was like, wow, what does that even mean? And it turned out to be really prophetic advice.
Very prescient. But hold on, hang on. So you said most of your training is on Zoom.
Yeah.
I get that,
Yeah.
pandemic time.
Uh-huh.
But this photo is also of your training. So
Yeah.
when did this happen? And also, where is this?
This is in Christchurch, New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
I was flown from Los Angeles to San Francisco, where we quarantined for 5 days, and then we were flown to Auckland and then to Christchurch. It was
Hang on. So I'm sorry. You had the application process, and you presumably got the job at some point.
Yes.
What was that like? What was that moment like? Was it a call? Was it an email? Someone show up at your door and like a
No, it was on the second Zoom thing. The executive chef said, I'd like to offer you the job. If you can clear the background check and the physical qualification, you've got the job. And that was it. And I knew I could, so that was really exciting. It was really good. But then I had to tell Julia, which I was a little nervous about. Like, but it went well. She took it really, she was super supportive. So,
Great.
Which is the baseline of the whole thing. I have support, and she knew that it was my dream to do this. So, yeah, so once I checked all the boxes, they said, we want you, just check the boxes.
Sure.
And there were a lot of boxes.
And so where did it start to sink in that, like, you're really doing this? This isn't just a dream.
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question, Andrew. I was like, there was a lot of denial, because you're not cold. You're going to REI in Santa Monica, and everybody's wearing shorts, and then they're like, so where are you going? I'm like, Antarctica. You got anything warm? What? So it is a very weird thing. I just wanted it to happen and be over with, almost, because I couldn't really make it real in my head.
Sure.
But everybody, they threw me a party, going away party and everything.
Nice.
So I had tons of support, and I got to talk to people who had been there and stuff, and got a lot of advice and stuff.
And then the best piece of advice that you got from those people?
Take less than you need. You don't need as much as you want. That somebody said, they're not going to let you die. It's somebody's job to make sure you don't die, and that really, because then I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to bring 80 pounds of aspirin and like 100 Band-Aids. Like there's people there, and that really let me let go of that, and I brought less. There are things I should have brought, but whatever. But it was reassuring.
Okay, so I'm sorry to cut you off, but okay, Christchurch down to McMurdo,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So this is like the plane, presumably, the horse that you rode in.
It was a New York Air National Guard C-17.
That's pretty neat.
And it was just an awesome, rattly, it's like a cargo container. And that flew, we had to wait 5 days for the weather to clear. In Antarctica. The weather was fine in New Zealand, but the storms in Antarctica are such that if the plane gets there and the storms are such, they have to turn around and come all the way back.
Sure.
And that happens a lot. And it was only about 5 or 6 years ago that storms kept every plane on the continent grounded for 40 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So that happened. So 5 days waiting for it to clear was nothing.
Sure.
And it gave us a chance to meet, and I got to meet my cohort for the first time.
Yeah.
And we exchanged information and stuff, and we had our last, really good New Zealand meal and last good coffee. And then one day they loaded us onto a plane, and for them, these guys, the Air National Guard, do this every day.
Sure.
That's their thing. They fly from Greenland, the North Pole, to Antarctica regularly. They're just, the globe masters. They do this. So for them, it was just like, get on the plane, here's your sandwich. But for me, it was like this, my life's dream, this huge thing, and so you rattle. It's a 5-6 hour flight, and we landed, a beautiful clear day, and we landed on the Phoenix Airfield, which is on top of the Ross Glacier. And it's a chunk of ice. It's a glacier about the size of Spain. And it's perfectly flat, and there's a whole crew of guys that just blades it all day, and they keep it flat so that the planes can land.
Okay.
And it's 200 feet deep in most parts around there. And when you step off the plane, the cold hits you like a sledgehammer to the chest.
Okay.
There's nothing can prepare you for that.
Right.
Nothing. It was just, I thought teeth were falling out. It was so cold. I was just, but it's dry and it's bright. The sun is like a switchblade. It is just stunningly bright.
That's such an interesting way to describe it.
And nobody's telling you what to do or where to go or anything. It's just like you got here, and there's this bus off in the distance, so you figure I'll probably should walk towards that bus. But there's nobody saying right this way. It's like, yeah, welcome to Antarctica. Get to work. We're not, this is, and you realize and you're reminded often that this is not a vacation or a spa or a cruise. This is like, whoa, you're here to work. You're working. There's nobody showing you, where the seatbelt is. It's off you go.
And so how many people are at McMurdo at any one time?
It goes from between 200 to 1,800.
Okay. 200 to 1,800.
Yeah, 200 at night in the winter months.
Gotcha.
Months of total darkness, it's an average of 200 people. When I was there, we started off with about 500 people, and then about 200 of those went off to field camps.
Okay.
So for most of the first few months, I just had to feed 300 people.
Okay.
But then people come back from field camps.
Right.
The military rotates all their people. So we actually got up to 800 that first season.
Okay.
I was there, and this last season I was there was a big construction boom. So we had like 900, 1,000 people at points.
Okay.
But on the average day, there's about 400.
400.
Yeah, 400 people.
And so for that first tour, what was like your goal? What were you hoping to get out of that?
Wow, that's a really good question. I gave myself all these very emotional assignments, like, can I do this? Can I still do this work? I knew I was going to be older than a lot of the people I'm working with. It come from a very different experience. So I was like, am I still relevant? Can I fit in?
Sure.
Can I make friends? Can I keep up with the pace? I'm not 22 anymore.
Sure.
And so I was, and also can I fit in? And can I even, I was the least outdoorsy person I know. So I was like, can I do this without crying? I haven't cried at the job, for the record, in decades. And I didn't want frozen tears to be like so I set myself all these things. Can I do this? Am I still relevant? Can I make friends? All of those things. And I'm not bragging, but yeah, I passed that test with flying colors on every level.
Right on.
Thank you.
Right on. Yeah, clap it up.
I kicked ass at the job. I led a team of 8 cooks that were in their, most of them were in their 20s. And when they complained that their backs hurt, I gave them more heavy stuff to carry, and I gloated. And then I would show them how to do downward dog, and I would, do a handstand every once in a while just to show them what it's like to be 60. And made lifelong friends, and the operation worked great.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in McMurdo now. You've found the bus. And you've started working.
Yeah.
What is the living situation like on base?
The Navy built 6 dorm buildings in 1986. They did a big modernization in 1986, and they built 6 dorm buildings. Everyone bunks with somebody else. Often they get 3 to a room, but this year it was most everybody had 2 to a room, no exception. Everybody has a roommate. Each dorm building had a lounge. Okay. The Navy was very forward-thinking, and they filled each dorm lounge with a VHS player and thousands of VHS tapes. Ooh. Probably tens of thousands of VHS tapes up till 1986. And There's a landline and a push button. There's a Bell Labs phone in every room.
And does that actually go to
you could,
somewhere outside of Antarctica?
No, you could only call the people in Antarctica.
Gotcha.
To call outside of Antarctica, there was a kiosk you could go to in the main building, and you could do this dialing system.
Gotcha.
And I was able to call Julie every week.
Nice.
But we could prank call people, which was really cool.
Okay.
And you said, like, is the refrigerator running? Things like that. And it was fun. And I got to show, like, all the kids how to play, like, songs on their touch-tone phone, because they'd never seen a touch-tone phone before.
Right.
They loved it. So it was a big hit.
He's from Funky Town.
And so the living arrangements were really comfortable, but it created something else that was really cool. Like you would whoever got to the lounge first got to pick what to watch. And that's what you watched.
Okay.
So you'd find yourself, you'd arrive at the lounge, something would be playing, you sit down on the couch, and you'd be sitting next to some guy like in his 70s who was a snowplow driver from Alaska, and a woman in her 20s who was, a theater major from Vermont, and some dudes from Hawaii, and some guys from the New Zealand military, and you're all watching Star Wars, and you're all laughing together. And I was like, wow, when was the last time you sat on a couch with 10 strangers and all laughed along at something? And that was kind of like a really cool moment. No one was looking at their phones, because they wouldn't have seen anything, because there was no cell service. But yeah, that was a really neat bond.
Yeah. So, like, to that end, sort of, what was the culture like? What was the sort of base culture like?
I think, to quote my old boss, Tony Bourdain, working in those intense, stifling, exhausting conditions makes everyone jettison their baggage for the sake of getting the job done. So there might have been people with radically different political beliefs or religious beliefs or whatever. That never came up, because that job had to get done. And there was this really great culture of mutual respect, whereas, like, if you were the guy who kept the heat loop going, if you didn't do your job, I'd be dead in maybe 36 hours. And if I'm cooking you 3 meals a day, so if I don't do my job, like that, and everybody kind of was aware of that. So we all kind of like mutually respected each other and really appreciated that work. And it was also, you saw the person cooking 3 meals a day, and he might be your roommate, so that was pretty cool. And everybody who got there had in common that they liked to work and that they were willing to endure intense discomfort to have this experience. Okay. And that weeds out a lot of lazy people and complainers and stuff. So what you're left with is a population of people who are really gung-ho to work and to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, you mentioned discomfort a few times. Apart from the cold, what are the kinds of discomforts you're dealing with in there?
Well, the Navy in 1986, they weren't Martha Stewart. So the bed they picked out is like steel. It's big enough for like an adolescent. And the pillowcase is some nightmare fire resistant kind of thing. So there's all of that. You have to share a bathroom with 18 dudes. And things like that, and the food at times really could be like, we were working with, everything's been frozen for 2 years. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes less, but usually it was about 2 years to get out of rotation of the stock. So people had gastrointestinal discomfort. You had aches and pains from your sleeping thing. There was just discomfort everywhere.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's hone in on the food a little bit here, such as it was. What was the menu like?
We had a menu rotation, a 30-day rotation, so we wouldn't make the same thing. We would only make the same thing once a month.
Gotcha.
And it was a list, it was a list that somebody put together a long time ago of classics. Like, you would see things like Salisbury steak or, chicken corn, things that you'd forgotten about. But they were classics. Everybody loves them. It's comfort food. It was a little boring at times and stuff, but they were the comfort foods that everybody liked, because you're feeding young people who are in the military,
Sure.
and then you're feeding people who are from the city. So you've got to find that medium,
Absolutely.
happy ground. We always, and we did a pretty good job. It was our only directive was to make sure everyone got 3,000 calories per meal, because when
Per meal?
Yeah, per meal. That was available to them, because when you're out in the cold, you're burning an extra 3,000 calories just by shivering.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I thought that was made up, but I saw that in action.
Big facts. All right.
Yeah. So, we always had mashed potatoes going, and you would see people who worked out in the cold eating mashed potatoes like you were hallucinating.
Yeah.
Is that a time lapse, or just piling them in? But we always made sure people had veggies, that there were choices there.
Yeah.
And then there was snacky food too. So we had a little pizza oven. So we would always have pizza.
Nice.
So things there was always comfort food and snacks, and then there were things you could take back to your dorm, like cup of soup and stuff like that.
Okay. And so, honestly, that dinner sounds like here at the Adventurers Club.
Not quite as good. Imagine 2 tiers below. But we had wins. We had some wins.
All right. What were your biggest wins?
Well, people were so hungry, and they had gone eating the same thing. They'd just eaten mashed potatoes every night for 4 weeks. All you had to do was get some goat cheese from the baker, which you had to trade some garlic for or whatever. It was a little black market. But you'd make a goat cheese caramelized onion pizza, and people thought you were like Bobby Flay. They thought you were like this genius, because it was just something new and different.
Sure.
So we'd have little hacks like that, and there were a lot of things that we saved for special occasions.
Okay. So speaking of ingredients that were rare or you didn't have ready access to, what were some of the other ingredients that you wish you had but didn't always have access to?
Yeah, a lot. I think they bought a lot of shortcuts. Like powdered beef stock,
Okay.
which just wasn't very good. And they bought this was a subcontractor of the Navy buying this, so it was really a low quality thing. And I really wish I had a better quality, or some bones to make broth with. So there were things like that. You wish you could have done it the right way. And a lot of times, and this happens here in LA too, in an institutional kitchen, shortcuts become standardized.
Yeah.
3 people do the same shortcut, and that's the way it's done forever now. And at some point, you'd like to go back and be like, no, let's do it the right way. So I wish I had more garlic. I wish I had more duck fat.
Interesting.
Because I was able to render just a little bit, like a quart of duck fat, and I used that it's like my Harry Potter potion that I would dole out little droplets of.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
That goes along.
But it really was time. When you're feeding 400 people, you got to hurry and you got to get the food out. It's that punctuality again.
Absolutely.
You got to get that food out. And there was a lot of times I wish we had more time and more hands to slow cook the onions.
Sure.
And just take your time with that, make it right, but you got to put it out. Because when dinner goes out at 5, and then there's a line out the door for 5. So
100%.
So there was a lot of sacrifices made, but there were a lot of wins too.
Sure. By the way, 3 people taking a shortcut and then it becoming standardized also sounds like the Adventurers Club. So, you mentioned that sometimes you couldn't get resupplied for days if the weather didn't permit it.
Yeah.
So what would you do if you couldn't get supplied for a week, 2 weeks?
Well, you know that's coming, and the people who've been there for years, they know that's coming. And there's a window of 4 months where there's no planes. So the planes that do come in before that window closes, they bring as many freshies as they can, and then you have to kind of hoard them. There'll be a box of garlic,
right,
and you will put 6 of them out on the shelf, and then you will hide the other 4 in the executive chef's office, and then you will tuck 2 underneath, the mucilix where nobody ever looks.
Right,
so
right.
know they're there. So you're always planning that, and that's where the black market comes in too, because that you saw the baker had goat cheese, and
and take some of that mucinex garlic.
Yeah. So that goes all around, but you run you run out. And they get to this point in the third month of that window where nobody is at a crunchy vegetable. And people are just getting cranky, and they're getting sad. And yeah, they're getting gassy, and it's a slog. And there's just nothing you can do about it, you know? And you keep trying to eat something new. Like, you know, you're like, oh, maybe I'll just eat pizza crust tonight, or maybe I'll try this thing over here. And people are like, you know, so it's not nothing. People go hungry.
Absolutely.
You know?
And so, sort of related to that, what is food storage like?
Well, that's a good question. The food storage that comes off of the ship, the cargo ship, delivers once a year. The main delivery. It comes in January. It takes about 2 weeks to unload, and that all the food goes into one big warehouse, which is cut into the earth a little.
Oh, wow.
It was dug out of the earth, so it maintains a temperature of 20 below. So when we want something, and there's somebody whose job it is to pull food for the week. Okay. So they'll pull the food out of that warehouse and bring it into our freezer. And our freezer in the kitchen had a heater in it, so that the food would get up to 38 degrees.
Okay, gotcha.
So it was, you know, it was a freezer, but instead of having refrigeration, it had heaters
to warm up the food.
Yeah, and it was actually sometimes the warmest place in the kitchen too. You'd go in there and sometimes, but it took about a week for food to go from 20 below to about 38. About 5 days.
Gotcha.
Yeah, different things behave differently.
Okay.
But that logistics is really important, because if you use up too much of anything in the beginning of the season, there'll be none of it in the end. So the rationing and that careful calculating of how much you use is everything.
Okay. We've been having so much fun that I want to take a step back for a second and talk about the layout of McMurdo. So Phoebe, if you wouldn't mind going back to the picture, like the kind of wide shot with all the buildings in it. There's a skua bird in the foreground. Looks like it's about to run into the camera. No, keep going. It's in there somewhere.
That's Scott's hut, by the way. There is. Yeah, the skua.
Thank you. Sure.
The hut point. Thank you. Those birds are assholes.
Well, so, okay, there's a wide shot of largely the whole base.
Yeah.
So, like, where is everything in relation
I'm standing on the hill overlooking Scott's hut. It's just out of frame, and that's at the bottom of that hill. We're all underneath Mount Erebus, and that's all volcanic rock that's come from Mount Erebus.
And Scott's hut is just off to the right?
Just off to the right, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And that sort of is the beginning of the inlet where the ship can come in. And right above it, those row of brown buildings, those are our dorms.
Gotcha.
Those were the dorms that were built by the Navy in the 80s. And that blue building behind it is where the galley was. That's the main dining hall. It's where all the administrative offices were. Okay. That's like the main building for the campus. And then to the left, that green building is a vehicle supply. That's the main automotive garage. And then behind that is the cranes, where we keep the cranes. And then there's the carpentry shop. But everything is right there in a 2-mile radius. It's about 3 miles perimeter on the base. So there is about 27 miles of roads in between this base and the New Zealand buildings. Gotcha. 3 kilometers away. Okay. So everything is right there, because it has to be there, because once you go past that 3-mile perimeter, it's ice, and everything's kind of moving. Right, yeah. And that's why we landed in the same spot as Captain Scott.
Sure. All right. So we've been outside to have our smoke break. I want to go back inside now. I don't need to tell you, like, kitchen culture has a reputation for being extremely fast-paced, extremely stressful. And then do you find that was, or how did you find that in McMurdo, when there is such a pressure to put on you, the cook? To provide, one of the only comforts that people have out there.
It's a good question. One, the people were more supportive than restaurant customers, because the population of McMurdo, they were just happy to eat, and they were grateful for that. So there was this, acknowledgement. Nobody was complaining. but the pace was still intense. Some people adapted to it better than others. There's some people who brought their restaurant mania with them, and I several times had to tell people, just chill. This is not, we're not ringing the bell yelling at the waitress here. We're just going to make this much food as good as we can, and we're going to get it out on time.
Right.
And it really became that organization was the antidote to that. But it was still a staggering amount of labor.
Right.
It was really a job designed to overthrow a Navy man of 23. It was. You know, there was no shortcut. It was a minimum of 60 hours a week. And
Wow.
there was just, that was the price of admission.
Sure.
60 hours a week. And everybody on the base acknowledged that the galley worked really harder than most people. You know, we were warmer than most people, but we worked harder. And it was relentless because everybody else gets off at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. We were there till 12 and sometimes later, sometimes 10 o'clock. You know, so we had this kind of like, again, we were at the bottom of the barrel, just like in New York when I was in my 20s.
Sure.
You know.
Must have been a fun little throwback.
Yeah, but we did good with the pressure.
Okay. So what happened if people didn't want to stay the whole season? If they didn't fit in, or it wasn't working out, or they got fired? Like, what happened to them? How easy was it to replace someone?
That was a topic a lot. And I didn't, looking back, now I can see that in the first 2 weeks of the season, or the first 2 weeks when everybody arrives, and we don't all arrive at the same time, but during my first 2 weeks, people were watching me really closely. Okay. All the older people and the supervisors talking with each other, and they were doing this to everybody. And one young man, he was hired as, you know, a dishwasher or something. He said something inappropriate to one of his coworkers, a young woman, and or more than one. And they went to their supervisor, and there was no HR, there was no email, there was no meeting, there was no discussion. She went and got a soldier, went to his dorm, said, pack your stuff, you're out of here.
Wow.
And they held the plane at the airfield, threw him on it, and that was it.
That was it.
And I don't know how they settle the contract financially. I think there's a clause and you get one check or two checks, and that's it. But they made sure, and I became aware of this later, that they didn't get stuck with anybody who couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
So by the time your first 2 weeks was up, they were like, oh, this guy's good.
Okay.
And we had all agreed to be good. There was a couple people that left because they refused to get vaccinated for the COVID thing, because it had just come out, so it wasn't mandatory yet.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But they said, oh, everybody's got to get the COVID vaccination. A couple people said, no, I won't do that.
Okay.
And they took the last plane out.
Wow.
Which was weird, kind of a weird kind of thing, but they stuck to their guns and they left. But there were people looking to make sure that you weren't going to be a problem.
Right.
And there was one woman I know who, she said she wanted to quit for a while, but she was just kind of depressed. And she ended up turning around, but she went to talk to somebody, supervisor, and they were like, well, you know, you're going to have to pay for your flight home, so you're going to end up owing us $5,000.
Right. And I'm surprised it's that low, honestly.
Yeah, I think there was, and they just said, that's not how this works.
Right.
So suck it up. And she did. She turned around and started to have a good time.
And so, like, how would you, I guess, counsel people who were feeling like depressed or feeling like they wanted to quit? Like, how would you turn them around?
It was, you would just like try to find some other place for them to be. Okay. That did happen. And I just said, you can ask this person to change your schedule. You can ask this person to change your workstation. You can do this, you can do that. But you've got to work at it. You know, you've got to do the work. It's not going to get better on its own. You know, but there were so many stories there of people who got in a fight or whatever during that window and had to be locked in their room for 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, not locked in, but you weren't allowed to leave your room, and your supervisor would have to bring you meals every day.
Okay.
Yeah. That really, I didn't see that happen, but
Sure.
that it has happened.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so I feel like we have a pretty decent sense of the work you did. I want to turn now to some of the other, say, more recreational activities. So, did you ever get a chance to get out of the base at all to do any exploring?
Yes, and again, the galley got the least chance of that because we were stuck on base. But now I've graduated to, like, after
Actually,
doing.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
We have a picture up on screen right now that I feel bears discussion. So can you tell us what's going on?
That's Chef Nico and Chef Joey and Isa and Ashley, the 4 members of my team. I'm very proud of them. This was at Halloween, by the way. This wasn't at a regular.
This wasn't a day-to-day occurrence?
No.
Okay.
There it is. And that's not
there's no
Joey's
hair
real
there.
hair either. That was our Halloween party, and that was people partied really hard and extremely punctually. We didn't. You would
Not
get,
2 words you usually put together.
no, it was hard partying punctually. And you would get we had a bulletin board, a computer bulletin board. There's no real internet, and you would get it was like Comcast, 1996, and
The real intranet.
and it was an
Just between the
intranet. It was an
system.
intranet, and it was really great because
Funny.
you could get a memo and everybody would see it, and you could post a picture and everybody would see it. So you'd get a memo in the morning that said, the Halloween party will start at 1800 hours at Building 155 and march to Building 167 and end at 2200 hours. Remember, high heels are not allowed on base anytime. And then it'd be like, remember to wear sunblock and please sign up for the cleanup committee. And so you would do your 10 hours at your kitchen, and then you would run to your dorm and you'd put on your rainbow unicorn outfit or whatever, and then you would run down to Building 155 and you'd have this little parade, and it's 20 below zero, so everybody you kind of parades really
quickly,
fast to the party, and people partied really, really hard, and then you did a half an hour cleanup, run back to your room, and it was like the party never happened. There was no litter, there were no empty beer cups, there was just zero evidence that there was a party there. But you remember, it was this raging party, and,
Sure.
and it was, but 4 hours later, there's no evidence at all. And that happened a lot, and people were just trauma bonded so hard because the work was just so exhausting. And this is what that person meant when they said, don't worry about thermal underwear. Worry about your Halloween costume, because you're going to be judged. Like, nobody cares that you're a hot shit chef from LA. Nobody cared that. They cared about were you good in the workplace? Do you make work fun? And what do you bring to the party?
Sure.
Because everybody's uncomfortable and exhausted, so everybody needs relief. So what do you bring to the party? Do you make fun? Did you make food? Do you volunteer to be bartender? Do you volunteer to be DJ? Do you help clean up?
Yeah.
That's what you were judged on.
Okay.
And nothing else. So it was a real meritocracy at that. But yeah, there were some raging parties.
Absolutely. And so, it looks like there's other types of team bonding activities. So
yeah.
Tell us about some of these other pictures.
Well, that's an international sporting competition. It's really important. It's an annual international multi-continental sporting equipment that the New Zealand neighbors created. It's called Tug of War. They take it really seriously. And it's 2 parts. There's Tug of War and then man hauling, where you have to pull something on a sled.
Really heavy.
Yeah, across the ice.
Sure. Okay.
And they wanted that, and we won the Tug of War. And that's actually the New Zealand. No, that's our team. Yeah, that's our side.
Where are you?
I'm taking the picture there. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not stupid.
Fair enough.
Those chicks are serious, man. I'm not getting there. But yeah, so we did that, and there was a couple of bonding things with our New Zealand neighbors.
Sure.
Because we shared a lot of facilities with them, but we still wanted to maintain our identity.
Right.
My crew, I was really proud of, did the very first production of the Nutcracker ever in Antarctica. And it was really great. And I was really proud of them. It was really great, because art making in McMurdo is something, you've just got supplies left over from the Navy and stuff. So you've got oak tag, and you've got primary colored, like, safety paint, some stenciling. there's not much. So we were able to make a whole production of the Nutcracker, and each department played themselves. And so like the janitors played the rats. And yeah, so and the fire department made a little cardboard fire truck that they run out, and it was a huge hit. It never been done before, and it was the highlight of the season.
That's delightful.
Yeah.
And then was there also band camp?
Yeah, there was a lot of music making. The Navy, as part of their culture, they invest heavily in music, and in the 50s they built a room filled with hundreds of brass and string instruments that are still there. And even though they're not in charge anymore, all the instruments are there. So you can go check out an instrument, and you're like, well, I'm in Antarctica for 6 months. I always wanted to learn to play the tuba. It's never going to be a better time. And somebody did that. And so there was we had an open mic night on Mondays. There was a little bar thing that sometimes had alcohol. But it was like a bar with a little stage. So we would do open mic night and trivia night and things like that. That's and people would practice. And then for New Year's Day, we built the cargo department built us a little stage, and all the bands.
What's it called?
Ice stock.
Ice stock.
Yeah. And it was fun. And we did a chili cook-off. I made this outdoor oven thing, and I cooked chili out in the cold.
How was it?
It was pretty good. I mean, there were some Texans that gave me some attitude, But I don't know. I thought it was pretty good.
Make chili yourself.
But it was also 5 below that day, so it was hot. Okay.
Yeah. Be expected to work under those conditions.
So the fun we had a lot of fun. There was a lot of partying. It was very punctual, and it was there was a lot of annual events that added. So they kept coming back. They gave it a lot of pride.
Okay, so some of those annual events being ice stock?
Yeah, they do ice stock every year. And the tug of war trophy goes back to the New Zealand building, or it comes back to us, who's got that.
Yeah.
And it's made out of toilet paper girders and gaffer's tape and stuff. But hiking was really the main recreation. Occasionally you would get an opportunity to go with a car across the ice.
Nice.
Some people got more opportunities than others, other departments. But you were always looking for those, and you were always making yourselves available to those. I volunteered at the snowmobile repair garage.
Okay.
It was a really great job, and I'd never been on a snowmobile before in my life.
Yeah.
And I volunteered, and I knew about engines. And I hit it off with those guys, and I got really good at repairing snowmobiles. If anybody, hit me up.
If anyone needs a snowmobile repaired.
But I got to test drive the snowmobile. I would change the transmission, and then I would just get to go rip out on the. That was pretty special. It was pretty special.
Do donuts on the Antarctic ice. Awesome. So back to exploring. So did you get a chance to do any exploring while you were out there?
Yeah, I think we went on one long-distance snowmobile trip to the base of the volcano, to Mount Erebus. That was pretty cool. I got to go assist somebody who operated field generators, and we just drove around the glacier all day. And that was just nice to be out in total what they call ping pong ball conditions, where you cannot see the horizon,
right?
Or you can't see the ground. It just becomes whiteness. It's like the afterlife. So I got some moments like that. I didn't get to get in a helicopter at all.
Next time.
But I had plenty of those moments of zen where.
And then, did you ever see any wildlife while you were out exploring?
Yes, the seals are always there. The seals, even when the ocean is frozen solid. Okay. And on your very first day there, that's the first thing that you see is this frozen ocean. It's the size of, Arizona. It's the Ross Sea. And it's frozen solid. 9 feet thick. And you've never seen anything like it. Nothing can prepare you for that. So you'll be in your kitchen, which could be anywhere. It could be a truck stop in Fairbanks. But then you go take the garbage out at the end of the day, and you're like, holy wow. and that never gets old. So plenty of walks out there and stuff, and then the seals start popping out right away. And you see them, but they just lie there and they snore. They don't really do anything. They sleep like 22 hours a day.
Wow.
And then they go back through their hole and they get a fish and they come back out and go sleep. So you don't see any wildlife at all until the skuas arrive, and they're migratory. And they're horrible. There's just these screechy birds that try to attack you. They fly at you, and they'll, like, if you're carrying a tray with your lunch, they're garbage collectors. They're like weaponized seagulls. And they're just awful. And they lay their eggs with no nest. Just like they plop an egg down on the rocks. Like welcome to life. Like, there you go.
It's like working at the base.
Yeah.
You get off the plane,
and there you are.
And then welcome to life.
No nest. Yeah, there you go. So you see those for a while, and you just learn to avoid them. And there's some warning signs about them. Like there was like a hatch we opened to put the garbage into a big container. And there's a skua warning. Like, look up. Because that thing, they'll cut you. They'll take they'll bite you. They're vicious. So you don't see any wildlife, and you really get a sense of what the planet was like before life began.
Sure.
Like, I felt connected to the birth of the solar system.
Wow.
Because it's just you, the ice, and the sun. And you realize that, well, for 6 months, the sun's going to warm this ice and it's going to break up. And the creatures are going to come out.
Yeah.
And then it's going to start to freeze up again. And you really see how the planet was before life.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Cycle.
But when the penguins show up, it's really the payoff.
Okay.
I really thought I was going to be disappointed. I thought it was a lot of hype. I did. And
Don't break my heart. Don't say it's just hype.
they totally live up to their trip. They live up to their hype. They're amazing. They're migratory, so as the ice breaks up, they follow in the cracks in the ice, because that's where the good eatings is. And then they get on shore, and they're all happy and playful, and the little ones are super playful. Right. And they'll run up to you, and the mothers are kind of like standoffish, and they'll hiss at you.
Right.
But a little penguin, it's like a stuffed animal come to life, and they're like, and they want to play. And you can't touch them,
right.
because it's a $10,000 fine for interfering with any wildlife, for littering, for polluting, for stealing anything, for taking something out, for explaining, blanket $10,000 fine. If it were a $2,000 fine, I would have hugged the Jesus out of those. I would be like, take my money. But 10 grand is 10 grand, right? And so they arrive, and everybody runs down, and you can't wait till your shift ends so you can run down and look at the penguins. And everybody announces, like, oh, they're at the Hut Point, or they're over here at the Breakridge, or they're by the so you know where to run, and everybody runs down, and they just, you've been there for like 4 months, 5 months now, and you're just exhausted, and here's these little gifts, and it just changes the whole vibe, and everybody's happy. But then you realize that they've come on shore to molt, to lose their feathers. Right. And when they do that, they can't swim, so they're very vulnerable. So they have to go up as high as they can on land to avoid predators. Okay. And then they're miserable because they're cold now, and they've lost their feathers. They can't swim. They're hungry, and they're cold, and they're looking for a place to stand for 3 weeks. And they'll find a rocky outcropping, which is kind of out of the wind, but they'll just stand there, and the snow will build up on them, and they're weird. They're molt. They're like kind of. Yeah. So it's kind of sad that you're like, oh, dudes, I want to go home too. And
come into the warmth.
But they are amazing. They are amazing. And if you get to, the rule was that if you found they travel in pods of 5 to 10 penguins. So if you spotted a pod, you get to name them. Okay. And I was lucky enough to find this pod, which I named the Furious Five.
Love it.
Yeah, and their names were Odile and Odette, Peanut Butter, Lawrence, and Mr. Saturday Night. And they were mine, and I put that up on the bulletin board, with my picture. I named them, so there you go. Yeah.
And so that's the wildlife, but there are other things out in the Antarctic, wilderness.
Yes. We saw, well, the big department, there's the marine biology department and the divers. And they get to be rock stars because they get to go under the ice and bring things back. And the divers, I was surprised, were just kind of regular dudes. They weren't like Navy SEALs. They were just adventurous guys. But the scientists would say, I want to study this crab bug thing. Give me some more of this crab thing. And they would dive down and fill a basket with that particular crab disgusting bug thing that I wanted to smash with my heel. And that's my friend scientist Robin, and she maintains the lab, and she was a science worker. And most of the people you meet there are science workers, and they're just sort of cataloging things and inventorying these things. And you could get to go visit her lab, and everybody had an open house day. And you could come visit the kitchen, and you could help out in the kitchen one day, but that was her open house day when she showed you everything that was living in the tanks that they had brought out. And that was really amazing. And everyone shares their work. So that was really cool to hear from the divers what they were doing, and to hear from the scientists what they were studying and what the big deal is with this crab bug thing that they wanted, which was really fascinating. So everybody made space to present their work, or to open their workspace.
Absolutely. I want to turn next to the history and mythology of that area. You said right at the outset that you basically walked past Scott's hut. So what is that like, being in that space?
It's really powerful. It's really powerful because I had read all about Scott and the expeditions and stuff, and then you're delivered there, and your dorm is 200 yards away from that, and there it is, and it's perfectly frozen. And Scott started building that hut in 1902, and they lived in it for 18 months, and then the second expedition lived in it. It was first 11 months, and then 18 months. And then Shackelton's guys used that hut 10 years later, and then it was frozen for 30 years before Admiral Byrd came in, and he said, preserve this. And everything's perfectly frozen. So there's a seal that Scott's guys killed lying there.
Wow.
And it's frozen just outside. It's never going to thaw. And you see these carcasses that they skinned and ate, and boxes of dog biscuits that they fed their dogs. And that's really powerful. That, and knowing what happened to them, and knowing what they suffered and what they endured, and you're in the same cold they were. You've got modern heating, but you're really having that experience. And there's so many memorials all around the base to people who've died.
Tell us about some of those memorials.
There's a wooden cross right above Scott's. Well, this is the big wooden cross. It's on Observation Hill, and that was erected by the surviving members of Captain Scott's expedition. And it was only about 6 months before that he erected the cross to the first guy to die in Antarctica, one of his sailors, who just slipped. And he fell into the water. That was it. And that, on the next slide, there's, this is a typical little thing, you'll find on a trail, and that's a little granite block that was made to commemorate a Navy cargo handler that was just crushed by a Navy cargo handling accident on the ship. And there's a lot of those. So there are these reminders that, one slip and you could be dead. And you kind of normalize the safety. Because you've had all the trainings and stuff. But then you're reminded that, wow, that's available.
Like you were telling me before the program started that, just one slip down, like on the between buildings, like even in McMurdo. And you're done. Like it's over.
The water is right there, and you're on volcanic rock that's really slippery, and the trail is easily marked. But you step off that trail and you slide down that hill. That's that. And you think if you leave the base, you have to take a radio. But after about 10 miles, you realize, like, if my snowmobile breaks down and my radio break at the same time, I've got 35 minutes to live. Wow.
Yeah.
And, but it's a good radio. The battery feels pretty good.
Yeah,
You're like,
it's fine,
let's go
probably.
for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
So that duality exists all the time.
Sure.
That comfort and death.
Yeah. And so, kind of drawing down to the end here, there's a couple things, last things I want to ask about. So, as everyone here knows, the Antarctica is governed by the Antarctic Treaty, right? And so, no nation can use it for its own purposes. But
that's right.
Recently, it's been under a lot of pressure because countries have been doing just that, trying to use it for their own purposes. So, my question to you is, do you think the treaty will hold?
Yes. The most amazing thing about the treaty is that we signed it, and that Russia signed it too.
Yeah.
And there was a time where we built McMurdo so that we could establish our presence, and the Russians built their base so they could establish their presence. And it was really France and Chile and Argentina that said, dudes, enough, enough of this. So let's make a treaty. And the amazing thing is we signed it. And because of that, no one can exploit, no one can litter, and no one can build, and no one can own. But at the same time, we're always doing core samples, and we all know that, well, there's coal here, and there's zinc here, and there's magnesium here, and there's this here. So we're really documenting all of the elements in the ground, and there are valuable things.
Absolutely.
And so it's coming up, the treaty's coming up for renewal in about 10 years.
Okay.
A little over 10 years.
Sure.
And I think, everybody will sign it, but politically, who will be in charge in 10, 13 years of U.S. and Russia? Who knows? Yeah. But I think the pressure will be really great from all of the other all the other signers of the treaty, all the other countries. The pressure will be very intense.
Okay.
And it's worked out for the U.S. in that maybe we don't get the minerals there, but we don't have to spend a lot of money on defense either. So it's kind of a detente that really does work.
Right. Yeah. What is one piece of gear that you brought that you wish you hadn't brought? And then counterpoint to that, what is one piece of gear that you did not bring that you wish you'd brought?
I wish I didn't need as many shoes as I brought, and a lot of heavy clothing. I didn't need that because everybody leaves stuff there. Because when you leave McMurdo, you're going to go on a nice tropical vacation. So you leave all your winter stuff there, and there is a hut. You just go take whatever you want. Yeah. So I wish I hadn't brought as many boots and as many heavy clothes and stuff. And I didn't read most of the books I brought because I found better ones. I didn't watch most of the movies I brought. So I brought a lot of junk.
Sure.
I wish I had brought better camera equipment, and I wish I had brought better coffee making equipment.
Okay.
Because the coffee beans that a Navy subcontracting company bought 2 years ago are really bad. I mean, we're talking truck stop 1986. Yeah, it was really bad.
Delightful.
And and then I found out somebody had a bag of roasted beans. Some Air Force guy came in and he had roasted beans. You wouldn't believe what I paid for them. I traded for them. But yeah, that was my big loss. Yeah.
What was the hardest part about transitioning to life down there?
To life down there was the schedule. The sun's not going down, and you've got to wake up at 5 in the morning or 4. I had to wake up at 4, and the sun was pretty much up by then. It was only a few weeks of semi-darkness for the first week. So you'd get to work at 4, and the sun's up, and then you get off work in the evening. And you expect nighttime, and there is none. And then your body kind of goes into this second wind. And that kept getting worse as it goes along until December, the solstice. On the day of the solstice, the sun made a perfect circle in the sky. It did not rise or set 1 inch. Yeah, and our shadows were like human sundials, just moving along as these long, long shadows moving along us. And I remember, I was in the clubhouse for my birthday. They threw me a surprise birthday party, and a few days after the solstice, and I stepped outside at 2 in the morning expecting it to be nice and pitch black so I could crawl home under, no one would see my shame. And the sun was just like a laser beam from Mars. It was skull-cracking bright. That made it really hard to sleep. It made it hard to adjust. So that, much more than the cold, was really hard.
Sure. Did you have imposter syndrome while you were down there?
Man. Well, on my way down there, I had, a stunning amount of imposter syndrome. I thought I was totally going to be a mess as the fraud from New York that I was, because I didn't, because you're meeting people who are working as janitors and they've got PhDs, and you're meeting people from the astronaut program, and you're meeting all these people who are really like Nobel Prize winning scientists, and you're like, I'm a cook, I made the mashed potatoes. So there was that, but I'm confident about my cooking, so I kind of like use that as, to stabilize myself, and that went away as the months went on. I was accepted, and I gained acceptance.
Sure.
But yeah.
And what was the hardest part about transitioning back?
Well, saying goodbye to people and but dealing with people who were not on Navy time and people who mumble and people who aren't punctual. And I found myself getting really cranky at people for not being punctual and not doing what they said they were going to do, or just not working that hard,
Sure.
So I'm getting over that, though, a little.
Well, James, I really appreciate that's all the questions I had. Is there anything else that you would feel remiss if we didn't talk about?
I know I could go on for hours. I just hope that you invite me back after my next contract.
Please,
because the coolest thing about working for the USAP is it takes you to places like Oxnard, California, and the North Pole, the Summit Station, and Palmyra Island in the South Seas. And I'm hoping that will be my next contract.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah. I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions then.
James, thank you so much, and your candid interview is fantastic. I'm just curious, as a cook, do you have any say into the products and ingredients coming in, or did you just have to work with what comes in?
Good question, but no, I didn't. You have got to work with what comes in because it really is 2 years out. So right now, somebody in Denver in an office who I'll never meet is ordering food to be shipped to the shipping port in Oxnard in about 6 months, and that'll get frozen. It'll get down to McMurdo 6 months after that, and then it'll be put in frozen. So it won't come out of that freezer for 1.5 years.
We all know what people in Denver taste, what they're tasting. Questions?
All right, questions from the audience.
You want to bring up? We got one back here.
Raise your hand. We'll get you a mic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thank you, Laura.
I have a question on what are some lessons that you learned about food or cooking that you feel perhaps you may never have learned if you hadn't had to do this in Antarctica?
That's a really good question because so much of the cooking was just so big a volume. I learned to do things with just really intense heat. Like we were cooking things at like 600, 700 degrees and moving things through the ovens so that you were like sort of flowing food out like everything became like a Neapolitan pizza. So high heat, I got really comfortable with ultra high heat. But yeah, it's not something I would do at home a lot. But you can do some great stuff with that kind of heat.
Sure.
I'm going to ask a question that kind of riffs off of Jack London's Call of the Wild, where I think he had some sort of description, like he knew how cold it was because he could, if he spit and it cracked on the ice, it was like 25 below or something.
Yeah.
If the New York kid come back from this with an experience of how to gauge how the cold it was by your own kind of the pants kind of?
Yeah, no, because it was changing so much and the wind was the bigger factor. Like the sun, it was like Arizona in reverse. Like if you went out and the sun was shining on you, you felt good, but then you take 2 steps out of your vestibule and you're in the wind and then you're just crying and you're begging for death like that. So no, it was always changing too much that I never really got a meter on it, and it was all still so new to me. I was still seeing different weather phenomenons 4 or 5 months in. But I did have an expression, a way to describe the cold. Like people would say, what's it like out today? And I would say, it's like sweet Jesus with maybe a chance of, oh, God help me, towards the evening. You'd say that, and people knew what that meant. They were like, okay, they put on another sweater.
What was it like when it was really bad?
You got to stay inside, and the worst it ever gets, there's a rope, there's a bag of ropes by every door, like a front door. So there gets to a point where you have to grab the rope and tie it around you, and you can go until you get to the next rope. And you can't let go of the rope because that'll be that. People, But I never saw it get that bad. But there was like maybe a 24-hour period my dorm room and my work room were only about 70 yards apart. So I walk out my dorm room, I run across the road, and I get into the kitchen. And most of the time I could do that without a coat. And one morning I ran out, and I got about 30 feet from my destination, and I turned around and ran back because I could not make it. That remaining 30 feet, it was so cold. And I ran back and I put on cold and did all that, and then went back out again. And we're talking literally like 100 feet.
Oh. Hey. I think you said you guys watched The Thing down there. What was that about?
Yeah, it was a very, very important film. If you haven't seen John Carpenter's The Thing, or the precursor, A Thing from Another World, a very important filmmaking. They sit everybody, it takes place in Antarctica at a generic base. And for all the new people like me, they said, okay, it's Thing Week. And all the new people were there, they sat us all down and they played The Thing. And this is about guys that live in it. But there are a couple of, well, if you have seen The Thing, there's a couple of things like if you find an alien in ice, don't thaw it, okay? Don't thaw it out. Don't put a heater on it. Just wait. And
Don't do it.
But the downside of The Thing, the truth about The Thing is, the movie, the real truth, you're not issued a flamethrower. And I was so disappointed about that. Yeah.
What's up with that?
There's no fire, because fire is the biggest danger on the ice. Because if your building catches fire, you've got to stand out on the ice. So fire, people don't even have like candles. You're not allowed to have candles.
But counterpoint, what if there's an alien that starts?
Thank you. I asked that. You know how many times I asked the question to my supervisors? That thing.
All right.
Great film, though.
Can't control for taste.
Hi, Larry Stern, 1112. One of my more pleasant experiences when I was in the Army was from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m., 37 below zero. That's with the wind chill, by the way. Ooh. And during that time, we were shooting big guns and drinking a lot of coffee, and nature called. Very unpleasant experience. Did you have that experience?
Yeah, I did. Not with the guns, though, but yeah, everyone is issued a pee bottle, which is a big Nalgene bottle, and because of the Antarctic Treaty, you're not allowed to pee outdoors. I'm sure it still happens, but we were told, that you have to pee in your pee bottle. But that means you've got to get your junk out in this minus 37 wind, at which point you've got choices to make. Like,
I want to share that part of the story.
Thank you. Yeah. You can have the pain of holding it in, or you can have the pain of frostbite on your junk. So, but there were a couple little places that they set up on the trails where you could go inside and kind of do your thing.
That's a real conversation in your head.
Yeah, it really is. It really, really is.
Question, you said you were on like a 30-day rotation for meals, and some of them were like a little old-fashioned feeling.
Yeah.
Was there a meal that everyone looked forward to and a meal that everyone dreaded?
Yeah, it was weird that they would have the things changed. There's a military bureaucracy. Things changed. You would make like gumbo. Nobody liked the gumbo because it was just you were using the wrong ingredients for it. And the next month they would make it the same exact way again. And you would beg, the supervisor's like, dude, please let me make something else, because this, and they were like, no, it's on the rotation, got to make it. So you would learn to just make less of it and put it over to the side, and then you could just do something really nice, But it was really Christmas and Thanksgiving were our department's chance to show off. Every department had to throw a party or do an event or do a thing, So the helicopter department threw a big party, the cargo department threw ice stock, and we threw Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. And so that was our chance to show off, and we hoarded that last bag of garlic and, the last potatoes and stuff, and, so that was fun.
Over to you, Andrew.
All right. Well, thank you, James. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And hold on, hang on. We got to do a little outro here. For the folks at home, if you liked what you saw tonight, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and liking the video. It really helps us out a ton. And if you're in LA, why not come on by? We do this every single Thursday. And next week, we got member Ray Perez talking about his recent trip to Syria. Seriously, y'all. It was within like the last 2 months. You're not going to want to miss that. That's going to do it for us here at the Adventurers Club. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time off the beaten path. Good night.
All right, James, stand here.